Yeah, Brenda don't even know about that property. 421, I love this song. Might have been what I led last time I led, I don't know. Let us sing. I was sinking deep in sin, far from the peaceful shore, very deeply stained within, sinking to rise no more. But the master of the sea heard my despairing cry. From the waters lifted me, now safe am I. Love lifted me, love lifted me. When nothing else could help, love lifted me, love lifted me, love lifted me. When nothing else could help, love lifted me. Souls in danger, look above. Jesus completely saves. He will lift you by his love out of the angry waves. He's the master of the seas, billows his will obey. He, your Savior, wants to be saved today. Love lifted me, love lifted me. When nothing else could help, love lifted me, love lifted me, love lifted me. When nothing else would help, love lifted me. I mentioned last week that some time I'd like to study about the gates and the meaning of the gates in the Bible. And Brother Ronnie said, well, why don't you do that real soon? And so I got to thinking, well, I've got all the material. I just hadn't put it together. And so I put a PowerPoint together on the meaning of gates in the Bible. It was very important. A lot of important things happen at the gates of the cities. So we're going to look at this morning, and hopefully then as you read, especially in the Old Testament, about some of the gates, you'll understand some of the things that happened there, why they happened there. Okay, the Iron Gate, Israelite Gate, this is the Iron Age Israelite Gate at Tel Dan. They called those mounds, the archaeologists called those mounds where they unearthed these ancient cities, they called them tells, T-E-L. And that's what Jesus was talking about in Matthew in the Beatitudes when he said a city set on a hill cannot be hid. In other words, at night that light just shows across the darkness for miles and miles, just a tiny little light. And that's what Jesus was talking about. And the reason these cities set on hills, they probably originally didn't even start out on a hill. But in ancient times, there were two things that they would try to locate a city by these things. Number one, you had to have a permanent water supply. A village couldn't exist without water. And number two, it needed to be a place that would be more easily defended than the surrounding area. And so if they could find a little slope, they would put it on that. But once they built the city, in a few hundred years or generations, some other people come in and conquer that city, they tear it down. Well, they didn't have these D8 and D10 and 12 bulldozers to push all that rubbish away. And so what do? This is the place that's the best to locate a city, so they put fresh dirt on top of it and just build on top. Well, archaeologists have discovered that in some of those mounds or tells that at least 15 different cities existed on that same site. Well, it keeps growing higher and higher each time a destruction is brought about, and they build another city, it goes up a little. And finally, these mounds are several feet high, but they were not that in the original. And so they're calling these tells. That's the Arabic word for this mound. And so this is the mound that covered the city of Dan that was in David's time. And so there's the gates. I don't know. It'd be pretty, I guess I can do it this way. If you can see this little arrow over here bouncing around in the dark egg, if I come straight in, that was the gates to the city, and then there was an inner gate apparently somewhere in here. But this level right here is the level of David's time, and this is another city that was built on top, and so that's another level than all those up above it. But that's where the city gates in David's time were located. Okay, given the importance of gate complexes for understanding ancient Israelite society and cultural background of the Hebrew Bible, it is a surprising fact that the city gate has not received very much scholarly attention. In other words, you don't find a lot written about the importance of these gates to the cities. But we're going to hopefully cause you to understand they're more important than it seems. That the city gate has not received very much scholarly attention. Discussions of city gates in the literature are both fragmentary and incomplete, partly because the topic is approached from a very narrow perspective. In other words, people don't give credit to those city gates as they should. They look at it as a place, a portal in the wall or a hole in the wall where people can go in and out, and that's basically all they look at. But it was more than that. And at any time, if any of you have a question or a comment, or raise your hand or just speak out, I'm not trying to keep you from talking as I'm going through this. This was the civic forum, the heart of the city. It was used, obviously, for military defensive positions or structures, but it was the civic forum. In other words, these city gates were like the courthouse, like our courthouse downtown and the old courthouse that used to be there. That's what went on at these city gates. And so once you realize that, it changes perspective on these city gates. And we're going to talk about some of these things that happened at these city gates. We talked about one last week, by the way. Remember Boaz, his transaction to get the land and Ruth. It happened at the city gate. There were city elders there, and they were witnesses to these things. That's why they happened in the city gates. So think of it in one way, sort of like our courthouse is. Of course, they didn't have a lot of written records, but they had these mental records. And in ancient times, a man's word was, his bond. Now, sure, there were some shady characters, but most of the people could be trusted. And so if they saw it, they would bear testimony to what they saw if it was ever called in question. Okay, so the open spaces of the gate complex hummed with activity. The city's town elders oversaw legal procedures. Kings publicly sat and took counsel. Prophets proclaimed their messages of doom. Townspeople came and went and bought and sold and worshiped their deities because there were pagan cities that did the same thing. They worshiped their pagan gods like the Jews worshiped Jehovah God. And people were tried and executed at these gates. So indeed, most of the city's civic life was centered on the town gate complex. So just think about all those things we've said there. They oversaw legal procedures. The town elders sit there. Remember when the angels came from God and to Abraham, and then two of them go to Sodom and Gomorrah? Where was Lot? He was sitting in the city gate. That tells me that Lot was more than just an ordinary person. he was one of the town elders. He was sitting in the gate. And so that's why he was there. Okay, and so all of these things that we've mentioned here, we're going to look at this. And of course, Jeremiah, he gives us a little, Joshua and Jeremiah, all of these give us an insight. Gates were primarily for protection. That's why they built the gates. They were usually, I'll just wait till I get to it. I have a drawing, and I'll show you several city gates in a little bit. But they were the most fortified places in the wall, because once you punch a hole in that wall, that's a weakness, and you've got to strengthen it up to keep the enemy from coming in. And so they kept soldiers there. They had gatekeepers posted there to open and shut the gates, but there was military usually stationed close to those gates in case of attack. Okay, they were open during the day but closed at night, according to Joshua chapter 2 and verse 5. So they had gatekeepers there that would open the gates in the daytime, but at night they closed them for protection. And then gatekeepers were posted to keep intruders out. That's what Nehemiah did in chapter 7, verses 1 through 3. Remember, when they came back and started building the walls around Jerusalem again, Nehemiah, at these gates, he posted these gatekeepers so that they would keep people that didn't belong in the city out. Sometimes gates even became personified. They would speak of a gate as if it were a person. As living guardians and representatives of a city. Listen to what David said. Lift your heads, you gates. Be lifted, you ancient doors, so that the King of glory may come in. Psalm chapter 24 and verse 7. So David spoke of the gates as though they were a person. That's what you call personified. And the opening of the gates symbolized a royal welcome. Conversely, or we'd say reverse of this, a city without a gate was the ultimate target. Listen to what Jeremiah said. Attack the nation living peacefully and securely, declare the Lord. It is a nation with no gates or bars. Now some of us remember when the tribe of Dan was moving, they seemingly couldn't drive the Philistines out. Maybe they were too lazy to do it. But they go up and attack the Sidonians in a little place called Laish. And they said the Sidonians are lazy. And so the Sidonians, they go up there and just take them over. They were almost like a city with no gates or bars. Well, they changed the name of that place to the city of Dan. And so that's where you get the expression from Dan to Beersheba. That was the northern and southern boundaries of Israel for quite a while. But that Jeremiah is saying that the Lord says it's a nation with no gates or bars. So gates were important in that way. But now we come to Mr. Lot. In chapter 19 of the book of Genesis, verse 1, and there came two angels to Sodom at even. And Lot sat in the gate of Sodom, and Lot, seeing them, rose up to meet them, and he bowed himself with his face toward the ground. That was sort of a custom in ancient times. To a stranger, to be friendly, you sort of bow down, acknowledging them. And so Lot went through all of the customs of the day, but he didn't want these people just going anywhere. Maybe he realized, maybe they look different than most people. Something may have caused Lot to say, hey, these guys are special. But whatever it was, he invites them to his house rather than them to go somewhere else in the city. Okay, this is the first time a gate is mentioned in the Bible, and this is in connection with Lot. But here we have him sitting there just like the city elders did, and that sort of suggests to me that maybe Lot had risen up as one of the leaders in the city. He was a wealthy man when he went there. With his cattle and Abraham's cattle were almost rivaling. Well, they were rivaling one another for grazing land. And so he wasn't a poor man. And so he was recognized by the people of Sodom as a man of wealth, no doubt. So he's allowed to sit in the city gates, just like the elders. And that sort of suggests that he may have been one himself. But the modern ears, other words, this is the first time that it's mentioned in the Bible to modern ears. The description in the gate sounds curious, but in biblical times, a gate or gates was or were not just a passageway through the defensive wall surrounding the city. It was typically a massive and often complex structure consisting of an outer gate and an inner gate, one providing a second line of defense with a space in between. Okay, this is Megiddo. This is the excavated city gates. You see the road that's in front, that's where you come in. And then you've got these little chambers here, and that's where the elders or the king, when he was there. Sometimes the king would sit even between this complex of gates and the ones in the inner side. We'll find David did that later. But these little cells were used by those elders and other people as places of transaction. And it was something very similar to this, where Boaz went and got his permission to take the land, purchase the land, and take Ruth as his wife. But now this is not the only place that this looks similar. It was a space between those two gates, sometimes just a corridor. Sometimes in some of the poorer cities, they didn't have the little cells. They just had a wide passage and benches, and that's where some of this transaction would happen. Sometimes just a corridor with recessed guard rooms. Sometimes a more spacious courtyard that the Bible calls in the gates. Much of the life took place within the gate area, based on biblical references and archaeological finds. That space served as combination of city hall and ad hoc law. In other words, there would be some lawyers there, and sort of like Hyde Park Corner. Or if you were in England, it'd sort of be like Speaker's Corner, where you've got all these people coming and speaking on different subjects. I think I've mentioned this before. When Brenda and I were living in England, we went into London, and I know at least one time, and maybe more than that, we went to Speaker's Corner on a Sunday afternoon. And the guys would come in with their little boxes, and this is where we get, he's on his soapbox. That's where we get that expression. Because they used to have wooden soap boxes, and they could get those easily from merchants. And they'd come out and turn that little box up and get up there and just start speaking to the wind. And after a while, somebody'd come by and listen, and then there'd be another guy come and set up over here. And before you know it, you've got 10 or 12 people speaking on different subjects. And people would listen to this one for a while, then you'll walk over and hear this one. And so the city gates was sort of like that. When you'd have different guys speaking about different things, people would come and listen to this one, move on over here. And I always pictured the Cane Ridge revival that Brother Stone held back in 1804. I always picture it being something like that. They had 20-something preachers preaching at the same time, scattered throughout the grove there. And so you can imagine. But the gate turned into something like this, but it was used like a marketplace. And in some of these gates, with none of the little cells, they also had the park bench, as I said. Now this is sort of a clear drawing of what the gate in David's time looked like at Dan. See these little people down here in the left-hand corner. Over here, they're going into the main gate from the outside. But you see that big space in between this wall and the next gate. And so that's where a lot of the public activity took. There's a platform there, there's a bench over on that side, and I'm going to show you the actual bench in it may be on the next slide. But that's the way the cities arrange these gates for protection, but also for civic events. As the maxim has it, it's not only must justice be done, but must also be seen to be done. And for the ancient Israelites, the one place in the city where transparency was guaranteed was the city gate. That's why Boaz goes there, because everybody's going to be able to see what's going on. It's not done in secret. We find Abraham when he buys the cave of Machpelah from Ephraim the Hittite. It's going to be a similar situation. The city gate then was where you could go and conduct business with everybody watching, so nobody would question later it was done in a deceitful way. Okay, it was a progressive judicial system for its day, but apparently could not entirely prevent official corruption. So there were even some of the city elders could be corrupted with money to rule the wrong way. And we find here, Amos in chapter 5 and verse 10, they hate the one who reproved in the gate. In other words, there were people who didn't like some of these judges because they ruled the wrong way, they thought. And some of them did that because they were bribed. Amos scathingly noted, and he raged against those who afflict the righteous, who take a bribe and push aside the needy in the gate. And so here you find Amos condemning them for taking bribes and ruling the wrong way. And then in verse 15 of Amos chapter 5, hate the evil and love the good, and establish the judgment in the gate. It may be that the Lord God of hosts will be gracious unto the remnant of Joseph. So he's saying, hate evil and love good. In other words, don't be like these guys that have been taking bribes, and establish judgment in the gate. So you see, again, we learn from this that this is where things were decided. Legal things were decided here in the gates. And then here's the next slide after this is going to be that picture, I believe. A well-preserved example of the city gate can be found at Tel Dan, a huge 70-acre mound in northern Israel, near the Lebanese border. Excavation of the site conducted over decades by the late Dr. Avraham, and that would be similar to Abraham, Birin of Hebrew Union College, expose an impressive Israelite city gate complex. And you see that young lady is sitting on the bench since they didn't have the cells in these gates like the others, this drawing that I showed you back up here, that thing always goes too fast. That one, you see there's no little cells in between. It's just an open courtyard. Okay, that's what you're looking at here. And that young lady sitting on the bench that they had there, and there's another elevation somewhere in here. But that drawing was made from what you're looking at here. But that was the city of Dan. Okay, and wisdom cries out there, says Proverbs chapter 1 and verse 21. In other words, wisdom cries out in the gates. Half a country away, the Israelite gate at Tel Dan, the site of the biblical Dan, city of Dan, has an ancient stone bench with telling seating for precisely 10 people. The gate of the city also had a podium. I guess that was that elevated part that I mentioned earlier. For the Israelite prophets of old, the feisty social reformers of their day. And Amos said, hate evil and love good, and establish justice in the gate. Amos may have proclaimed a message similar to that right there in Dan. Okay, besides being a part of city protection against invaders, city gates were places of central activity in Bible times. It was at the city gates that important business transactions were made. Court was convened and public announcements were heralded. Accordingly, it is natural that the Bible frequently speaks of sitting in the gate or of the activities that took place at the gate. In Proverbs 1, wisdom is personified. At the head of the noisy streets, she cries out in the gateways of the city. She makes her speech. And that's in verse 21 of Proverbs chapter 1. to spread her words to the maximum number of people. Wisdom took to the gates. So there's, if you want to get a bigger crowd, go to the gates. That's what they did. Okay, it was a place of execution. In the law of Moses, parents of a rebellious son were told to bring him to the city gate, where the elders would examine the evidence and pass judgment. That's Deuteronomy chapter 21, verses 18 through 21. This affirms that the city gate was central to community action. Okay, here's what Moses said. If a man have a stubborn and rebellious son, which will not obey the voice of his father or the voice of his mother, and that when they have chastened him, will not hearken unto them, then shall his father and mother lay hold on him and bring him out unto the elders of the city and unto the gate of his place. And they shall say unto the elders of the city, This is our son. This our son is stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey our voice. He is a glutton and a drunkard. And all the men of the city shall stone him with stones, that he die. So thou shalt put away evil from among you, and all Israel shall hear and fear. You see, that was a pretty harsh law. But in order for it to transpire, they took them to the city elders at the gates. And if they declared him to be guilty, they'd take him out and stone him just outside the city gate. So it was also a place of judgment and execution. Okay, here's some city gates. I'm going to show you the excavations of 2 or 3. But you see, here's one with the 3 cells in it. Well, actually, yes, there's 3, because you can see on this side over here clearer. But there's 3 different locations there. And this would have been part of one right here, because it's blocked off. I've got another picture. I should have shown it. That shows more complete. But there's 3 cells on either side. And that was typical. But sometimes a smaller city either didn't have any or only had 2 cells, as this one here. There's only 2 cells, as you can see, on either side. But this is where the city elders sat, and this is where they passed judgment. And you notice all of these places that I've shown you. Let me back up here. See, these are all on elevated places, if you notice. They're looking down. That was for protection. This one's looking down. This is another city. And then here's another, and there's only 2 cells here. I forget the name of this little village, but it's not a real important one. It's just one they've excavated, but it only had the 2 cells like the other. But larger cities had the complex. This is Solomon's Gates at Megiddo, and there's Gezer over here. That's another city Solomon built, and Hazor over here. And all of them have the 3 cells in each gate, so that business can be conducted. And so the city gate was more, brothers and sisters, than just a place where you could go and go through or out. It was more than that. It was more like a courthouse. The king was sitting between the 2 gates of the city. Presumably, this was the city of Mahanaim, because it's talking about David, anxiously waiting for news from the battlefield. The victory is complete, a runner tells him, but Absalom is dead. The king was deeply moved and went up to the chamber over the gate and wept. David's troops were dispirited. The Bible relates, their victory turned into mourning. Joab, David's general, angrily burst in on the king, upbraiding him for indulging his personal sorrow and ignoring his men, and warning him of disaster unless he reasserted his royal presence. You see, this is where his son Absalom tried to take the kingship away from David. And so the people are in question, who's in charge? And David, instead of going out and taking charge, he did what any father would do. He went mourning over the loss of a child. But in that, he's not taking charge of what he should do. This is a rendering, an artist's rendering of David mourning above the gate. Then the king got up. After Joab gave his little speech, he got up, took his seat in the gate. The troops were all told, "See, the king is sitting in the gate." And all the troops came before the king. This is in 2 Samuel chapter 18 and 19, where this story is told. Allegiance was restored, and the rest, as they say, is history. But here is an artist's rendering of David sitting between the gates. You see the inner gate to the city in the background, and the outer gate, we're looking through it from the outside. But that was David sat there, and David was not the only king that ever sat in the city gates. He sat there to be seen of the people. Okay, deals were sealed. It was in the city gates through which people constantly flowed that agreements were verbally sealed in the presence of witnesses, a necessity in an era before written contracts. Genesis 23, verse 8. This is about Abraham. And he communed with them, saying, "If it be your mind that I should bury my dead out of my sight, hear me and entreat me to Ephraim the son of Zohar." You see, Ephraim the Hittite owned a field that had a cave, Machpelah, and Abraham wanted that cave in order to bury Sarah, and then later he would be buried there, and other patriarchs would be buried there. "That he may give me the cave of Machpelah, which he hath, which is in the end of his field, for as much money as it is worth, he shall give it to me for a possession of a burial place among you." And Ephraim dwelt among the children of Heth. Other words, he was a Hittite. Ephraim the Hittite answered Abraham in the audience of the children of Heth, even of all that went in at the gate of his city. So, you see, Abraham transacted the buying of that cave from Ephraim the Hittite at the city gate. So transactions were done there. Deals were made and sealed there. Okay, Ruth, this is Ruth chapter 4 and verse 1. "Then went Boaz up to the gate and sat him down there. And behold, a kinsman of whom Boaz spoke came by, unto whom he said, Ho, such a one, turn and sit down here. And he turned aside and sat down." This is a crucial a moment here, a crucial moment in the ancestry of David and Jesus, because Ruth is going to be, and Boaz are going to be the grandparents of David, and then of course that's the line that Jesus descended through. So it was decided by an exchange of a sandal that we talked about last week, that old dirty shoe, at the city gate of Bethlehem. And this is in Ruth chapter 1, verses 1 through 22. In addition, the virtuous woman was praised in the city gates. Her husband was known in the city gates. So you see, all of these things transpired at the city gate, more than just coming in a city and going out of a city. Those gates meant more than that. And then the Bible talks about possessing the city gates, and I think this will be our last part. Controlling the gates of a conquered enemy was a symbol of defeating that enemy. Part of Abraham's blessing from the Lord was the promise that your offspring shall possess the gate of his enemies, and that's in Genesis 22:17. That in blessing I will bless thee, and in multiplying I will multiply thy seed, and as the stars of the heaven, and as the sand which is upon the seashore. And thy seed shall possess the gates of their enemies. Other words, at some point, they're going to own this land where people now are living that are not part of us. And then verse 60 in Genesis 24, "And they blessed Rebekah, and said unto her, Thou art our sister. Be thou the mother of thousands of millions, and let thy seed possess the gates of those which hate them." So twice in the book of Genesis, it talks about Abraham's seed are going to possess the gates of those that don't like them or their enemies. And this is just sort of a picture of soldiers attacking a city gate, and so they will possess them. And then in Joshua 20 and verse 4, And when he that doth flee unto one of those cities shall stand at the entering of the gate of the city, and shall declare his cause in the ears of the elders of that city, they shall take him into the city unto them, and give him a place that he may dwell among them. Now, what we have here, brothers and sisters, we're looking at a map of the 6 cities of refuge. You remember when the possessions were divided up amongst the 12 tribes. The Levites were not given a possession of land. Joseph, who was one of the patriarchs, in a sense, he gets 3 parts. You've got Ephraim, and then you've got Manasseh. But Manasseh is half tribe east and half tribe west, so they actually have 3 possessions. But you may remember, Simeon is down here at the bottom of Judah, but it's going to be absorbed into Judah. They're going to lose their identity, so to speak. And so the Levites didn't get any land, but they are in charge of 6 cities of refuge. These cities were established so that if you accidentally kill someone, or if you kill someone in self-defense, the rule of thumb back then, an eye for an eye. In other words, you kill one of our relatives, we're going to kill you. And if a person accidentally killed someone or killed them in self-defense, he could flee to one of these cities, which was no more than a day's journey anywhere in Israel to one of those 6 cities. There were 2 on either sides of the river. And he could go there and tell the elders why he was there, and they would be obligated to take him in and protect him until the things could be squared up. But if he stayed there and it hadn't been done until the high priest died, then he was free to go anyway. So these cities were to protect the innocent. If you accidentally killed someone, or if you killed someone in self-defense, you could go there until it was proven true. The arrows are pointing at the 6 cities, Kadesh in the northern part near Dan. In the middle is Shechem, and then in the south, Hebron, and that's where Abraham lived. And then on the east side, you've got Bezer, almost straight across the Dead Sea from Hebron. And then you have Ramoth Gilead. You have that name mentioned several times in the Bible. And then you have Golan. And even in modern times, sometimes we would hear of fighting between the Jews and the Lebanese at Golan Heights. Is that time for me to quit? Was that an alarm telling me to quit? Yeah. Okay. So Joshua chapter 24 is telling them then that when he doth flee to one of these cities, and shall stand at the entering of the gate of the city, declare his cause in the ears of the elders of the city, they shall take him into the city unto them, and give him place that he may dwell among them. So if they decide, hey, this man, he needs to have a fair trial, they give it to him. And this is one of the gates. This is in modern times, but this is one of the gates there at Jerusalem that's been restored. And this is what it would have looked like in ancient times. Now, are there any questions or comments? Okay, yeah. I think that's the rich man's gate, because he's there because the rich man is singled out. If it was at the city gate, I think why this particular person was singled out, if it was at the city gates. They did. They had a compound. As a matter of fact, most of the houses in Israel were built with a little wall around them. They kept their sheep and their cattle at night because they didn't have big herds. Most of the poor people didn't, and they would keep them in that compound at night. And so, yeah, I'm thinking that there Lazarus was at the gate going into the rich man's house, because the rich man was singled out and not everybody in the city. That's my own personal opinion, for what it's worth. But it seems, because they had the gates to their own houses. Exactly. Well, you remember the story about the foolish and the wise virgins. You know, when they get there, they can't get in the gate. The ones that didn't trim their lamps on time. And so, yeah, they did. I've got a lesson. I don't know if I ever did it on a Wednesday here before, but it's on sort of manners and customs that the people did. Did I ever do one like that this last year? It talks about, you know, just common everyday things that they did that sort of highlighted in the scriptures in places, but what they did and what we do is sort of two different things. But it helps us to understand the people of the Bible times more. Maybe we could do that sometime if I've not done it. I don't want to do a repeat on you if I've already done it and y'all remember that. Yeah, I've got one on the everyday life in the Holy Land, and in there's a picture of a house and the compound around it. It was just an ordinary house, not a wealthy person's house, and it shows the walls and the outer gate. And I'm thinking that's where Lazarus was at. And then the temple had a gate. You know, when Peter and John were going up to the temple, that man, you know, they said, silver and gold we have none, but what we have we'll give to thee. And so he was healed of his afflictions. Sometimes the words don't come to me exactly when they ought to. Okay, so we'll end this one then. And no questions. Ronnie had a question. Yes, sir, Brother James. Yeah, that was the main intention. But oh, yeah. And the only judgments made there is if you can get in or you can't.
Back then, gates were fences were put up to keep things in. Now we put up fences to keep things out.
Exactly. Yeah.
Lunch at Culver's.
Lunch at Culver's. Brenda, don't you wish you could go? Brother Ronnie, would you lead us in a prayer?
Heavenly Father, we're deeply thankful for this time set aside to study thy word. We're thankful for the power of Brother Wayne in his presentation. Pray, Heavenly Father, that we'll read and study ourselves and motivate and gain much from thy word. Pray, Heavenly Father, this time we be with those who are not well, as we continue to be mindful of those who have lost loved ones whose death as well as the still worthy. We pray, Heavenly Father, that they will turn to thee each stronger for receiving comfort that they need. We're mindful of those who are receiving treatment for cancer and other needs, like these Christians still receiving treatments in Houston. Pray, Heavenly Father, to continue to be firm things to go well. Pray that you lead our congregation here and Marshall, that will be examples we should be. Continue being with us as we go through life and continue today. Thank you for the blessing we share with us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.